welcome to the Bridging the Gap panel, which I hope you'll all agree is a very, very important panel because, of course, the cannabis industry is very unique in that it is really completely patient-driven. I mean, regardless of whether you're interested in the recreational or medicinal market, your biggest customers are probably always going to be patients. So this will help you connect with them, hopefully. So joining us today, we have Professor Mike Barnes, who is Professor of Neurology, Director of Maple Tree Medical Cannabis Consultancy, Chair of Medical Cannabis Clinicians Society, and Chair of Cannabis Industry Council. It's a mouthful.
It's a mouthful, thank you.
We have Thompson, External Relations Lead at PLEA and UK Representative for the IACM Patient Council. Jonathan Nadler, Co-Founder and CEO of LYPHE, and Muslimov, Founding Partner of venture capital firm Leafy. So I'm actually going to start off with a little question for you, Beck. So when you are choosing who to invest in, how do you vet the companies? Do you look for evidence that they have the patient's interests at heart?
Maybe I'll just quickly introduce myself. So Beck, Leafy is early stage venture capital fund, backing exceptional founders, working with alternative medicine to address mental health and pain disorders. We, I guess in this community, our role as investors is to direct capital to best management teams, best founding teams, best companies that truly working to harness and maximize the therapeutic potential of alternative medicine. When we look at these companies, obviously for us, for early stage funds, it's all about people. So we look at the mindset of founders. We look how their vision, is it well articulated, is it long-term, and whether the patient interests are priority for them, because that's fundamental of the viability of the business model. So patient interest should come first. Also, the company should have that community approach. And when we invested in LYPHE, for example, for us, those was a criteria why we decided to invest. LYPHE, for DNA of LYPHE is patient service. So more than half of the team at LYPHE is in patient service team. And also engage with various stakeholders in the community, working with drug science to support the observational studies, also engaging with NHS to help them execute their clinical trials as well. So for us, this is it's not sort of tangible sort of metrics, but it's more the founder mission and vision, how they want to change this industry. And patients are a priority.
So when we spoke before, you mentioned sustainability as well. So what does that mean to you?
Can you say it again, please?
Sustainability.
Sustainability, yes. So we, as a fund, we have a very long-term view on the sector, and for us, it's more important the eventual milestones that we will get where the patients will have the access to this medicine, and we always supporting the sustainable approach to the sector. It's better to make consistent steps forward rather than make some mistakes and then again sort of moving backwards. So we always looking to make sure that the investments we make in companies that's sustainable in their approach, how they work with the community, but also in the business model. And there is a direct link as well. You mentioned about, let's say, metrics. There is a link between how you care about patients and then retention rates. So for us, when we invest in businesses, for us it's important that the business has that repeat elements where they have the customers who always coming back or patients who always coming back. And if you can only achieve that if you, again, truly care about patient interest. And with LYPHE, for example, as well, we were, again, impressed by low churn rates in the patient cohorts, and that was also a reflection how well they work with patients.
Okay, thank you. So, I kind of feel like the whole medical cannabis model in the UK at the moment is unsustainable by its very nature, because of course the customers right now are disabled and chronically ill, seriously ill people who are often using their disability benefits to pay for their medication. These aren't people who have decided to opt into private medicine because they have the money to do so. They're people who have essentially been forced into this situation. So considering that that is really not a sustainable model. I mean, like on my Twitter, for example, I have a lot of patients who follow me, so I ask questions on there to kind of get a feel for what's going on. And a lot of them said that they don't want to pay more than £5 a gram for top quality cannabis. And I think that's because they can't pay more than £5 a gram, a lot of the time. So really the only way it's going to be sustainable is if it's on the NHS. And obviously then, hopefully, the brands that offer good cannabis medications, they will get the contracts with the NHS. But Jonathan, do you think that the big businesses behind cannabis, like LYPHE and others, should be doing more to push for availability and accessibility and regulation change as well?
Yeah, so since day one, back in 2018, we've been pushing for market access. That sits kind of as a central pillar to our business. Hopefully we're seen as one of the leaders in doing so in the UK. Everything we've done has been about how do we get patients as quickly as possible to the medicine they need. Clearly we're a bit hamstrung by the regulatory framework that we're operating within. So we just do the best that we can do based on the regulations that we're presented with. It's obviously slow moving, so there's lots of patients that have been lucky enough to get to medical cannabis, but there are a huge amount that still haven't. And there's all sorts of issues of why they haven't. Clearly, a large majority of current patients who are on benefits are struggling to afford the monthly payments. As a business operating for profit, although we haven't made any of that yet, just like the rest of the cannabis industry in Europe, I would imagine, we have to take cash for the services we offer and the products that we sell. I know that there's all sorts of interesting things going on with groups to try and get the NHS to change their mindset, but 3.5 years later, we don't seem to be going anywhere. So I think there needs to be a massive shift in approach, and we need to I 100% believe that we need to decriminalise, to be honest. I think the only way around this, if the NHS aren't going to move, and if there's not going to be a rescheduling again to make it even easier for cannabis to be prescribed, and there's not going to be a shift for GPs to start to make prescriptions themselves and therefore open the market, and reimbursement isn't going to happen by the NHS, we have to decriminalise. We have to allow there to be a grow your own market. We have to allow there to be clubs in operation with the head above the parapet as opposed to below it. And what that will hopefully do is it will move the patients that can't afford it, that are happy to consume it through the grow your own market, to do so, and to swap product with those in the clubs as well. And then what it leaves is those that want to go and see a doctor who are able to afford it to go and do so. Now, there's still probably a proportion that don't want to operate in the adult use market or the illicit market, whatever you want to call it, in the grow your own market, and they can't afford to get their prescriptions. And that is a group of people that needs to be seriously looked at, because if we can't help them, and if the decriminalisation structure wouldn't work for them either, then NHS do need to jump in. But the question is when and how.
Well, as it stands, obviously they're having to come to private clinics. And so, unfortunately, they are technically customers. Patients are now customers. They're having to pay for their medication. So the service that they receive has to be that. It has to be good customer service, good care. And I think a lot of patients feel that's very lacking. And the TMCC group under LYPHE, they just had a CQC report that, I mean, you said yourself was disappointing. I think it said it requires improvement, and there was mention of there being lack of transparency and poor communication and lack of education or appropriate training in the clinicians. What are your plans to improve?
Well, we're always improving. I mean, we're seeing the most patients in the UK, 8,500 patients we've seen in the UK. Our churn rate is actually extremely low, so we hold on to patients. Some of our patients have had 23 prescriptions from us since we've opened. So we've got a lot of very, very positive patient case studies. And unfortunately, there's a few things in the way that we went around the clinic that the CQC looked at in a poor light. But we're very glad that there's lots of other stuff that they highlighted as being good. And since the inspection in March, we've made huge amounts of changes to the clinical setup of the business. We employ 50 patient service coordinators now, and the training's improved. We've got a patient director who's looking after those patients. So we've got a whole new clinical team, a whole new medical director and associate director team. So there's huge changes. And look, we see volatility in the market across the board. You know, if you read the forums, which I'm guessing you do, there's people leaving every single clinic in the UK and moving to another. We take patients from other clinics regularly. We lose them to other clinics regularly. That's just the nature of the beast. You know, it's we're doing whatever we can to improve the service levels, and I think, and I hope everyone else is as well. Being at the forefront of the industry. Fortunately or unfortunately, we're the ones that get poked with the big stick by the regulators, but we're happy with that. We don't mind being in the front and centre of it all. We're keen just to keep pushing on and doing what we're doing and servicing the patients and giving them what we believe is the best service we can, whilst running a million miles an hour.
So, Zach, as a patient representative, does this kind of sound like what you want, or what do patients want to see improve from their clinics and businesses?
The medicine, I think patients want to know that actually their medicine is safe to consume. At the moment, we can't access certificates of analysis. We have issues with mold. We have issues with bug infestations. So it's got to a point now where EU GMP, from a patient perspective, is meaningless. We have patients where you go into a doctor and you're seen in and out within 5 minutes. There's no real patient care. There's no continuity of products that you receive. Batches change from month to month, and that's not just one licensed producer, that's right across. And I think that is a real issue, but actually patients, there's a lack of transparency, there's a lack of consistency, and there's a real lack of quality. A quality product is not contaminated with mold. It does not have bugs in it, but somehow that is allowed to be prescribed to patients. I work with a lot of HIV and AIDS patients. I would not feel morally able to say, come to the prescription service in the UK, because I would be concerned about the harm that they would face, because we do not know what we're consuming beyond what it just tells us on the label. There's no transparency whatsoever. And then when we try and contact pharmacies and try and get this information, we're denied this information.
Well, I heard recently that a producer had said they didn't want to bother making the terpene profiles available to patients because the patients wouldn't understand them. How do you feel about that?
I think that's insulting to patients' intelligence, telling them that they can't actually understand the information. I think it's important to just, beyond just terpenes, and understanding the microbial count, beyond that, the heavy metals in this product, is the pesticides in this product that's being organically grown. There's just no information available to me as a patient beyond what my doctor tells me is on 20% THC, 4% CBD, to then go onto the manufacturer's website to then find out actually it doesn't contain any CBD whatsoever. But I've been prescribed that product based on the fact that it has CBD in it, and it has no CBD in it. So I can't even actually trust what the label tells me, and a lot of patients are facing that. So even the label on these EU GMP products isn't actually accurate and reflective of what actually is contained, and I think that is a real problem.
So we're in an interesting situation with the cannabis industry because, you know, unlike standard medicine, there's a very different, or there should perhaps be a very different dynamic between doctors and patients, because, you know, ordinarily you've got the doctors who are the specialists, and they know more than the patients. But I think in a lot of cases for cannabis patients, they are the experts. You know, they have been using this for years, they've been researching this for years, and I think especially when you're talking about parents of children who need cannabis oil, I mean, they really, really know their stuff. So Mike, you train clinicians, and do you think that the clinicians overall in the cannabis clinics are educated enough on cannabis and the endocannabinoid system to be prescribing it?
Generally, yes. There's 110 doctors prescribing in the UK now. And I think, you know, they deserve a round of applause because they're not going to get one, I can see. But thank you very much. But they've taken a leap into the dark. They've weathered the criticism of their colleagues, and they've stood up and prescribed what they think is right in the best interest of the patients. I'd like to think that most of them are properly and well trained. I know some aren't, because unfortunately the UK medical system is weird. Once you've got a medical degree, you can do what you like. Okay, you might have to, if you want to be a neurologist, you have to train to be a neurologist. If you want to be an obstetrician, you have to train to be an obstetrician, whatever. But to be a cannabis doctor, you don't have to do anything else at all. At the moment, you just have to be a doctor on the specialist register. You could be a gynecologist. It's weird. So what we really need to do is have some sort of proper recognised cannabis training, accreditation, certification, whatever we care to call it. Make the Royal College of Physicians realise that this is a valid subject to be trained in, and we shouldn't allow doctors who aren't properly trained to prescribe the stuff. And they should also be trained to listen to the patient feedback, because this is, as you've said, this typical pharmaceutical medicine. Some fancy chemist somewhere thinks of a molecule to adjust it. They then put it into preclinical trials. They then do double-blind placebo-controlled trials. They market it, then get a whole team going to market to the doctors, and the doctors finally give it to the patients. Cannabis is completely up the other way around, because it's the patients are the experts. So the doctors have got to be compassionate, well-trained, but also trained to actually listen to the patient they're prescribing it for, because probably that person in front of them knows a damn sight more about it than they do. So there's a long way to go, but nevertheless, you know, I think those 110 doctors have done it and are doing a great job.
So, sorry, go on.
I was going to answer the previous question. Can I do that, or does that put your timing off completely?
What previous question?
About the NHS. Yeah. You know, the private sector is the only way to have started it. It was the only way to go. But actually, they've seen, 17,500 patients-ish now. That's less than 1% of the people in this country who would benefit from their medicine. Less than 1%. And we fiddle around with the private clinics. Fine, we fiddle around with it with training. The only thing that really matters is to get this prescribed on the National Health Service. Then it doesn't matter if it's £5 a gram or £10 a gram. It's £0 a gram because it's the NHS. And I presume when the government voted for this law to change, that's what they intended. And what we need to do... I'll shut up in a minute. Don't panic.
Go ahead. Take your time. We've got 16 minutes to fill.
All right, well, 60 minutes and 21 seconds. I can fill that quite comfortably. I think the key thing that I would put number one of any priority is to get GPs to initiate the prescription. And, you know, Leon Barrett of Lyon's here did a survey. I think it was about 25%, 28% of the GPs will be prepared to prescribe. And if you've got 28% of what is 18,000 or so GPs prescribing, that will put immense pressure on the government to actually fund the blooming stuff. And so I would put number one, number two, and number three priority is to get GPs to prescribe, get pressure on the NHS to get that prescription going as the government intended. And that can be done by Priti Patel this afternoon. But she won't do it this afternoon. But, you know, it's a pity she's filling out. I don't know what she's doing this afternoon, but she could do this. She could change one line in the Misuse of Drugs Regulations 2018 to change from specialist doctors to be prescribed to specialist doctors and general practitioners to prescribe. That's all it will take to do. So I put a plea out for Priti Patel to get on and do it.
She's not listening.
She's not listening.
She's not here.
Doesn't listen. Okay, I'll shut up.
So, Jonathan, do you think that cannabis businesses should be doing more to interact with patients? So, you know, for example, there's in November, there is a UK cannabis patient conference, that's being held by the Cannabis Industry Council and Drug Science and MedCan. Are you going to be attending? Can we get people attending? Do you think they should attend?
Happy to attend. Yeah, of course.
Yeah?
Yeah.
And what do you think about, the patient advocacy groups like PLEA and like MedCan? I just think it's crazy that they're working so hard. Like I was Lorna yesterday on the stage saying she volunteers 40 hours a week, and Zach, you were saying sometimes it's 60 hours a week for you, and you get a huge amount of contact from cannabis businesses wanting information on patients. I just can't understand why they're not being sponsored or invested in. This could be for you as well. Would you ever consider financing or sponsoring or investing in a patient advocacy group?
Of course we would. I don't know if they would want us to.
They do.
We're very happy to. We put money into lots of different groups for real-world evidence and for all sorts of interesting things, MCCS and CIC and so on and so forth. We support all patient advocate groups. We're fully behind them. If they need sponsoring, then please come my way. We're very open to it.
Reach out, guys. He's here.
I'll meet you after this.
He's here all day. So, Zach, are you patients, not you, all the patients, are you happy with the cannabis products that are available currently, not just in terms of quality, but as in the range?
I think the range is somewhat limited. I think there could be more variety of products. I think especially there could be more applications of products, especially at the moment. The main applications are sublingual oils and flowers. We don't have things like transdermal patches. You can get access to capsules, although it's few and far between. Topicals, again, are few and far between. I'm not aware of things like suppositories, pessaries, nano-emulsion sprays. I just think they kind of need to increase the application. Not a lot of patients are comfortable with using flour. Some patients don't respond to oil, some do. So I just think there needs to be more applications so patients can truly get the benefits that they're seeking. And I think at the moment that is lacking, because you can really only access flour. But then, say for example, I didn't bring any prescription with me today because I just simply do not feel comfortable traveling on public transport, interacting with police, even though I have a prescription and I can demonstrate everything I'm asked to do, have it in the container, provide proof of prescription. The reality is patients are still being arrested. They're being told that they're only seeking drugs. There's multiple videos circulating online of patients being arrested in these circumstances, and I think actually this is why we're seeing patients look into things like oils, etc., or looking into vape pouches, etc., so then it allows them to live their life independently, go to a restaurant, go to their family's weddings, etc., go just out about in public without drawing attention to themselves. Because I think at the moment, a lot of patients are scared because when you've paid £150 for 30 grams of flour, and then for that to be taken off of you, and then to deal with the stress of that, to try and get that returned, and then go for a new appointment, then pay for a new prescription, it's just not sustainable. Police in the UK are refusing to accept that this is legal. We're constantly having to deal with police cases where they just will not accept that this product has been legally prescribed to patients.
So, Beck, have you interest in any kind of companies that are doing that, kind of innovative cannabinoid medicines in patches and minor cannabinoids?
Yeah, of course. We're looking for innovation. So I guess the primary goal is to provide more access to patients. We're constantly looking on the lookout for companies that are working in this direction. We also quite bullish on European cannabis pharmaceuticals. We believe that compared to North America, for example, or compared to US, Europe doesn't have a federal prohibition, and it has much more, I guess, sustainable and approach to the development of the medical cannabis framework, where recreational potential will happen not sooner than, let's say 3-5 years. What that gives us is the incentive to do more clinical studies Do we have that sort of natural evolution from medical to rec? And in North America, we've seen where sometimes we put in the cart before the horse, where the rec market moved faster maybe than anticipated, and then that sort of created some frictions for medical cannabis markets where maybe there are not now enough incentive to the clinical studies, and also there is on top of that there is a federal prohibition. And Europe and on that front has that, I guess, window of opportunity to actually gain the leadership in this area. We have lots of life science classes around Europe, and they can build new cannabis pharma companies, and that would also allow, let's say, for doctors easily to prescribe cannabis pharmaceuticals, because with unlicensed medicine they take some liability risk. With pharmaceuticals it's somewhat reduced, and that will give more access to patients. And also, I think I was talking to Jonathan today, and also importance of NHS access, that and being able to get the prescription through NHS will facilitate more access to cannabis. But for NHS, to change their view, they need to see more clinical studies. And what we see now is that clinical studies from year to year, they're exponentially growing. So let's say, 5 years ago, there were around 15 clinical studies a year. Last year, we saw that clinical studies were approaching 100. And year before, it was 40. So we're seeing exponential increase, doubling number of clinical studies. So we're seeing that tide is coming. And also, on the top of that, drug science doing Project 2021, observational studies, real-world evidence data is becoming quite and medical community understand the value of that. So eventually that will hopefully open up the NHS access as well.
Thank you. So Mike, you mentioned to me that you kind of hope to see the death of cannabis clinics at some point.
Yeah.
Would you care to?
I didn't know I was going to sit next to John. What I meant by that, and I think the cannabis clinics was the only way to start. Mm-hmm. Because not NHS, it wasn't embraced by the more generic clinics, so it was a good way to start, and it will continue. I think what I'd like to see is more generic clinics. Let's assume it's going to be private, and my tirade against the NHS, let's forget that for the moment. Mm-hmm. What I'd like to see is, say, a pain clinic where the pain doctor can look at all the possibilities, whether it be physiotherapy, exercise, or some of the licensed analgesic medications, and cannabis, just as part of their general armory. And it's an odd thing, really. If you have a new antihypertensive drug, you don't go to a new antihypertensive clinic. You go to a blood pressure clinic and see a blood pressure doctor. It should be the same. For a pain clinic, a pain physician, pain doctor, cannabis should be part of their armory. Psychiatry should be part of what they do for chronic anxiety. Epilepsy should be part of what they offer for epilepsy. So I think there's a bit of a trend, and I would support that trend, of seeing cannabis in those more generic clinics, and indeed seeing it as part of just an independent doctor sitting in their rooms at Nuffield or Bupa, whatever they do, and just offering cannabis as one of the options they have. Let's normalise it. So there's no criticism of the current cannabis clinic, because that's how it had to start. But let's try and normalise it and not put it out there. The cannabis clinic, they're a funny lot. They're full of old stoners, and they don't know what they're up to, and it's easy to move them sideways. And that's what we don't want with cannabis. We want to embrace it as a perfectly valid, perfectly safe part of medicine. Mm-hmm. So I think in the end, if I could wind forward 5 or 10 years, I think probably the pure cannabis clinic will have gone or morphed into a more generic clinic.
I agree.
Yeah, I was just going to say, what do you think about that?
Thank God for that.
Yeah. Well, I think it's just a journey, isn't it? I mean, we opened the market with clinics because that's the only way you could do it. So we wanted to work hard to make sure that we controlled that bit of the supply chain, so that we could have the doctors that are putting their head above the parapet, prescribing under our watchful eye. So that's how it all began. Now, clearly, as things mature, you want to see more doctors prescribing cannabis. For whatever reason, it's not working in the current structure. I mean, we've got 110 prescribing clinicians, 75,000 on the GMC register that could legally prescribe, and they're not. For whatever reason, they're not. So something isn't going right, and we need to evolve the conversation towards the mainstream, which means GPs prescribing. And you know, if you look further afield, if you go to Florida, for example, which is, I suppose, quasi-adult use, but 700,000 patients with medical cards from doctors in a country of 22 million. So the opportunity for seeing patients move away from the illicit market and into the medical market is ginormous here, but it isn't going to happen under the current framework.
So, Zach, what do you think about that idea? Do you think patients would prefer that? Does it make it feel more accessible if it was set up like that?
So just seeing their doctors independently rather than going through a clinic?
Yeah, and there being clinics that aren't cannabis clinics, but more condition-specific clinics.
Yeah, because I think actually care is is a part of a whole package. So you can have chronic pain issues and you see your doctor, they can prescribe cannabis, but they can also send you to a physiotherapist, send you to a psychologist. I think there are many different routes. It kind of needs to be comprehensive care rather than, okay, here's a prescription, off you go now, because that patient is a person. There's a lot more to them beyond than just their condition, and I think there are other elements of care that actually need to be looked at. I think Dr. Danny Gordon talked about this yesterday, about you need to be able to offer a full-fledged service. It's not just, oh, here you go, here's a prescription, off you go now. And I think this is why bringing it back into GPs is a good idea, because that GP generally has probably known you since you were a child. You've seen that GP, and then they're going to be able to deliver you a whole package of care, and then not just, okay, well, here's prescription, then off you go. And I think then it's being able to actually bring in complementary care services, looking at this as a whole team approach, and bringing the whole multidisciplinary team to do that. So I think if you look at clinics, say, there are clinics that offer those services to patients, and I think that's a good, to me, I think complementary care, being able to access other services rather than, okay, I'm just here to get a prescription for my pain. I can also go see a physiotherapist now. I can also go see a psychologist. I can also look into other complementary therapies and have a whole package of care, because I think that's really the way forward. And you can either do that through a clinic, or you can do that, see a doctor independently. But I do think there kind of needs to be a whole package of care rather than just being a prescription.
All right, we've only got 1 minute, 44 seconds left. So, quick guys, to wrap up, I want an answer from all of you, which actually is a question that Zach gave me. So, what value do patients have? Go ahead. Who wants to take that first?
All the value. Everything comes from the patient. I mean, we're here because of the patient. I mean, everything we're doing is because of the patient, and there's interesting things going on in that space. They're patient first for research. There's patient boards forming across the industry now as well as obviously the patient advocate groups that are in existence. It's everything. And the industry is doing all it can to ensure that it's giving the best service to those patients. And where it's letting them down, it's trying to improve it. And there's some things that are out of our control, some things that are in our control. But it's all about making sure there's gold standard service for the patient. They get their medicine. There's continuity of supply of product. They get the medicine they want at the right quality and the right price. And we keep moving the conversation forward.
Anything to add?
I totally agree. I mean, patients started this movement. They're the experts, and every company in this space really has to have a mechanism by which they embrace the patient, feedback from the patient, listen to them, listen to their feedback about the customer service, listen to their feedback about the products and the pricing and everything else. Not just lip service, but a real meaningful feedback from the patients is absolutely critical. And some companies do that and do it very well. Others, frankly, don't at all. And everyone in this industry should start to do that.
Thank you.
Patients first. Without patients, there simply would not be an industry. It's true. Like, without a patient, we would not have an industry to work in. So, of course, patients have the absolute greatest value. I think there needs to be a patient on every single board of every single medical cannabis company across the world, because I think you really need to be reminded why you are doing this, who you're interacting with. We're not just numbers. We're human beings who require care. And I think actually, if you can work alongside a patient in developing products, then I think you're going to be a lot more successful, rather than if you just ignore us and think that you can making presumptions about what we want. Speak to us, ask us what we want. Don't make presumptions. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. We're all individuals. One chronic pain patient is not the same as the next chronic pain patient. And I think this is, the entire industry really does need to do is engage with patients more. Surprisingly, patients want to see this industry succeed. We want to help you develop products. We want you to help develop your services. We want this industry to succeed. I need access to medicine. If this industry does not succeed and people aren't making money, then this industry will fail. I do not want to have to go back to an illicit market. I want to be able to access my medicine through a safe route. And at the moment, I am scared as a patient that this industry will collapse, because I do not think that the industry is engaging enough with patients.
Well, hopefully that will now change. Now you will watch this panel and you know what to do. So thank you very much. That's us. We're done.
Thank you.